Okay, awesome. Well, thank you all for coming. Today I'm going to be talking to you all about drafting your abstracts. So, whether you're working on a proposal for the Graduate Student Showcase or submitting an abstract to the Graduate Student Conference here at URI. I know there's also a lot of other conferences happening at this time. So, hopefully, we can get you started and give you a nice roadmap for drafting your abstract and then having a nice kind of attractive abstract that engages more readers and a larger audience. So thank you for coming. My name is Gabby. I'm a PhD candidate at the Graduate School of Oceanography here at URI. I'm also one of the Graduate Writing Center coordinators this year. I'm joined by Rebecca, who is also a Graduate Writing Center coordinator. She will be, answering questions in the chat if I don't see them, and if you have anything, feel free to stop me or pop your questions in the chat. Raise your hand. You can stop me throughout this presentation. I'm happy to take questions whenever. Also, if you have, experiences that you'd like to share, I'd love to hear that too. So why don't we, just to start, who here has written an abstract before? You can put your video on and raise your hand, or you can use like the raise hand kind of function in Nice. Okay. Okay, cool. So if you have written an abstract, great. I hope that we can kind of fine tune your skills. And if you haven't written an abstract before, also great. So we'll take time to really understand what an abstract is and how to get started, because writing abstracts as graduate students and as researchers is really important. It's going to be a skill that follows you throughout, your whole career. So yeah, let's get started. All right. So first of all, what is an abstract? What am I talking about? So I'm sure you all have had to read papers so far in your research, and the abstract is this first thing you see on a research paper. It is basically a concise summary that includes points, the major points of the research article, giving some background, the purpose of the study, methodology that was used in this study. It also provides the major aha moments, kind of conclusions from your study, and then ends usually with like the larger implication and what this means for like the field in general. And so what an abstract really is kind of a preview of what the research paper is going to be about, or the project. If you're working on proposals, that's a good thing for the reviewers to first look at, or presentations. So it's really kind of this advertisement to read further. So if you're thinking about especially conferences, there are so many talks and presentations happening all at the same time. So before people go to these conferences, typically what they'll do is look at people's titles of talks and their abstracts to see if it's something they're interested in going to see. This may happen like before the conference, it might happen like the day of the conference, but either way, that's usually how people decide what their day is going to look like and what talks they're going to attend. So it's really, really important to try to make your abstract a strong advertisement to really capture that reader's interest quickly. And I know from, when I've gone to conferences as well, the abstract and the title is really important. So we'll talk about the title too. The title is one of those first things that you see that first captures the attention, and then the abstract's kind of that second kind of buffer to see if this is something you're going to read or it's not. So it's really important to have that strong first opening. So how do we begin? What does the structure of an abstract kind of look like? So typically, especially like scientific abstracts, they kind of include a small piece of each of the major sections of a research paper. So that includes the intro, methods, results, and conclusions. But all abstracts, no matter if they're in the science field or otherwise, they all follow kind of a story arc. So they really want to tell us a story about what it is that we're going to be reading or what we're going to be listening to. So this includes an opening, kind of setting the topic and what we're going to be talking about generally, and then moving into the challenge or the problem that we're trying to address. And then you go into this like action where what did you actually do to try to address that problem? And then the climax, like a story climax, is like everything that happens. So, what happened, what major results came out of this experiment or the study or surveys or whatever you're doing. Um, and then a resolution. So, that resolution is kind of the main conclusion of your article and how it generally fits back into your field. And so I said generally at the beginning of this whole kind of discussion and just now, and that's kind of leads into why this looks like an hourglass shape. So this kind of format is really useful when you think about it in that way. So if we think about an hourglass and what we have here, like this shape is what I'm talking about. We want to start really generally in our intro and then get more and more specific to what work you're doing and what your conclusions are and that kind of thing. And then you want to broaden it back up to relate it to more people in your field. Because, for example, I'm in oceanography. There's all kinds of different people in oceanography studying anything from like fish to chemicals in the ocean. So we can start really generally talking about the field of oceanography and then get into, specifically what am I studying? And then ending it on this conclusion of like, this is why what I study is important to all of you in my field, that kind of thing. So this kind of shape is really good for abstracts. It's also really good when you're writing research papers in general. So you can think about your whole paper starting out like this, like your intro is pretty general and you get more specific. Conclusion again ends more general. And I even use this like paragraph to paragraph throughout my writing. So it's a very useful tool that can really help us narrow into the specific problem and end on a note that is applicable and relatable to many people in your field. Any questions so far? I know I'm talking a lot and saying a lot. If you have any questions, again, feel free to pop them in the chat, stop me, any of that. Okay. So another tool that I really like to use is the CARS model. Sorry, there's people joining real quick. Okay, so the CARS model, it stands for Creating a Research Space. And so this is another strategy to really create a strong abstract. And if you look at some scientific journals or journals that you publish in your field, oftentimes they kind of follow this strategy. They want you to really point out how you're addressing like a knowledge gap. And this kind of model really does. Remember? Okay. So there are three different parts for this kind of framework. So it's first establishing like a territory. This is where you're talking about what your field is in general, and then moving to establishing like your role, like what is the thing you're addressing, and then the last part is how do you address that. And so it's really an effective tool for writing really great introductions, but I think it also works well here for abstracts too. So now we can look at these parts in a little bit more detail. Okay, so the first kind of move, they call it, is establishing a territory. So this is really setting up the situation or giving some context for your research. This is where you kind of give a little bit of background into the topic and perhaps discuss previous research. So this is really setting up like this is what we know in our field right now. This is the state of the research and um, kind of like leveling with your reader. Like we all know this stuff right now, okay? But then you move into the problem. So this is where you're addressing like these outstanding questions in your field. This is the major problem. So this specifically is where you're identifying a gap in the knowledge in your field. Um, this is really, really important to set up because it makes it pretty easy for you to show how your research answers that question. So this is the problem, identifying the knowledge gap. This is also a place where you can kind of discuss, um, the relevance or why your reader should care about what you're kind of presenting here. So we will go through an example together in a little bit, and we can talk about how they do this. But generally, this is another way in your introductions as well. You want to identify this space that hasn't been researched before, so that you really set yourself up well for the next part of this, which is occupying this like niche. So this is how your research fills the knowledge gap. What do you do to answer these outstanding questions in your field? This is the solution. So here's where you kind of outline the purpose of your research, give a little background into the methods, just a quick um, overall summary kind of your methods, and then you start to kind of articulate the huge findings, like not the huge findings, they can be small findings too, but the like major findings of your article or your presentation, that kind of stuff, your research. Um, so you're really starting similarly to our hourglass shape tool. You're starting generally with, what do we know in our field? What do we not know in our field? And how am I helping to address what we don't know? So you're ending on a note that really kind of captures the reader as to why they should, care about your research in general. Okay. Does anybody have any questions right now about any of that? And we're going to go through some examples together at the end. So if you have any questions again that are coming up, we can go through those then. Okay, so another really important part of writing abstracts is being concise. So one reason is because scientists and academics are really busy people. I'm sure that you guys have done this as well. You don't often have time to read a whole paper just to understand the main point. So before you get into reading the whole paper, usually you read the abstract. If it's even something that is worth your to read, right? So having these abstracts is be concise and right to the point of saying like this is why my research is impactful is really great. It makes other people feel more inclined to come to talks or to read further in your paper. So that is one reason why it's important to be concise. It's also important because abstracts usually have pretty strict word limits. So in journals, they can range anywhere from like 100 to 500 words. I think 500 is like the max I've ever seen. But usually 100 to 250 is typical in journals. So that is not a lot of space to explain usually some pretty, technical stuff. So it's important to be concise to hit those word limits. Um, but it can be very difficult to explain, science or research in fewer words. So what you really want to focus on is conveying those like main themes and the message that you want your reader to really take home. So you want that to be very clear and effectively written in a short but understandable way. And it can be pretty challenging to, right out of the gate, just write 150 words describing your research. So don't be afraid to write more and then start to kind of chip things away. That's when you can kind of start looking for these like filler words or sentences that, maybe provide a little bit of background but aren't super strong. Um, Abstracts are definitely a place where you don't want to include any kind of like fluff, so to speak. So when you're looking through your abstracts, you want to make sure that, every sentence is effective and needs to be there. If that makes sense. It's telling the reader something and some new information that's important. Okay, so some of the kind of tips for making your writing more concise. Like I said, removing some unnecessary words. So some words like basically or really or very, those kind of descriptive words that don't necessarily need to be there, you can get rid of those. There are a lot of multi-word phrases that can be condensed down to like one word, and I do this all the time, especially with in order to. That's like my thing I always have to look out for. But instead of saying in order to, you can just say to. So if I was saying, in order to measure phytoplankton, I did this. Instead of saying that, you could just say, to measure phytoplankton, I did that. So it cuts out a few words and gets more clear in your writing as well. One other thing to think about here is using active voice versus passive voice. Typically, active voice removes a lot of unnecessary words. So, for example, that last example they say here, in the paper, the conclusion is that, and then they would say the conclusion. You can make that more active and cut out a lot of words by saying, we conclude that, blah. It gets right to the point and it's a lot more understandable for people. Okay, and then some kind of examples here we can look at together. So this person wrote, moreover, we show that sharks are larger than otters. Thus, sharks should be considered in global management plans. Finally, sharks are also faster swimmers than otters. Okay, that can certainly be tightened up, right? We show that sharks are larger than otters and should be considered in global management plans. Sharks also swim faster than otters.
Just
I
you can still touch it, but the display looks weird. It's always flashing, and then when everything went black, I think this phone is not. So I need to sell and get a. I don't know if Apple Group is right. I just check expire. I didn't buy the Apple Care Prime for this year. I haven't do it.
Cindy, if you're having technical difficulties, please pop it in the chat and we can work with you on that. Okay. So anyways, what was I saying? Yes, that example. I think the second example that they provide here could also be tightened up even more. So instead of saying what they said, I think it could be tightened up to say, we show that sharks are larger and faster than otters and should be considered in global management plans. So that really gets the point across, gets their major findings in there, and then keeps all the information that they want in there as well. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about with abstracts is verb tense. Sometimes this is hard to remember and keep track of, but we do have different tenses that we use when we're describing our research. And this is similar to not only in the abstract, but in other parts of your research paper. So for example, we use present tense when we're talking about known facts or hypotheses or questions in our field. So that's really in line with our introductions. So for example, we would say the average life of a honeybee is 6 weeks. We wouldn't say the average life of a honeybee was 6 weeks or will be 6 weeks or anything like that. But then the next two things, which is where you're talking about basically your methods and results, those can have different tenses. So keep in mind for your methods, if you're talking about experiments that you already conducted, then you're going to use past tense. So here they say all the honeybees were maintained in an environment with a consistent temperature of 23 degrees centigrade. Great. If you're writing a proposal and describing methods that you have not done yet, then you're going to actually use future tense. So instead, you would say all the honeybees like will be maintained at this environment or in this environment. So that can be a little bit tricky sometimes. And then when you're describing the results of an experiment, that's also where you're going to use past tense. So these are things that you found, you observed, they're already done. So that's where you're going to use past tense. Again, the example, the average lifespan of bees in our contained environment was 8 weeks. So that's what you measured, that's what you saw, it's over and it's done. So that's what you're going to talk about, and that's how you're going to talk about it. And like I said, this kind of aligns with your abstracts, obviously, when you're talking about background, methods, results. But this is similar to how you should structure it when you're writing your research papers as well. So tense can be tricky, but definitely keep an eye out for that and make sure to revise based on that. Okay. So then the last thing I wanted to touch on before we do kind of an activity together is the title. So I mentioned it earlier on in the workshop, but the title is really important for a paper, maybe even more so than the abstract. So I know, when I am doing like a literature review or going on Google Scholar to figure out, what I need to include in my background and my intros and that kind of stuff. The first thing I do is look at a title and see if that's something that I could include or if I would even be interested in including it. So you want your titles to be descriptive. You want them to be concise so they like stick out. And you want them to have searchability. So just like I was mentioning with like Google Scholar, you want to be able to use keywords in your title that people might search when they're, looking for literature reviews and that kind of stuff. Like for example, for me, if I typed in, phytoplankton, temperature, modeling, that should pull up some of my papers, because I use those words in the titles of those papers. So think about things that, you type in when you're looking for certain papers in your field, and that could be helpful to kind of structure your title as well. Sometimes it's nice to work backwards like that. Just as an exercise, I recommend it. You also want to make sure you give like the main punchline or the findings of your experiment in that title. That could help people decide if that's what they want to read or not as well. And so this chart here gives also some more tips on what you should and should not do to have a good title. So length is definitely one. Keeping it between 10 and 15 words, I think, is a pretty generous range. Punctuation, try to avoid question marks or exclamation points. Like I said, use those keywords. Definitely try to stay away from using abbreviations or jargon. Because if you want to reach a wider audience, it could really limit people from reading further. So try to keep it jargon free and pretty friendly to a general audience. And then humor is one that I think some people can get away with, definitely, but just keep in mind, that some humor doesn't translate, or like pop culture references don't always translate to other areas of the world or different generations or that kind of thing. So sometimes there's a time and place for humor, I think, in science and research for sure. Um, yeah, okay. So that's what I have about titles. All right. So before we start our activity, does anybody have any questions at all about titles or abstracts? All right. Okay. So, I thought this could be kind of fun. Oh, wait, sorry. There might be. Okay. I will share the presentation slides and the recording after this is done. So no worries about that. Okay. So I thought this would be kind of fun to do kind of a abstract dissection in a way. Um, so I have an abstract that I can put up and we can do this all together. Or I can put you all in breakout rooms. And if you guys have an abstract, you can look at a volunteer's abstract together. Does anybody have a preference between those two options? You can say in the chat or unmute. Okay, I am going to, let's see, what is it today? Okay. All right, so I'm going to share an abstract from a paper that I think is a good one. And what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to first copy and paste this link into the chat. And then here, I'll do that first. Okay. So this is the abstract that we'll use for this activity. I'm going to send you guys to breakout rooms and you can talk amongst yourselves, or if you want to look at it by yourself, that is okay too. But see if you can pull out some of these major parts of the abstract, and then I will bring us all back and then we'll talk about it together. And then we'll move on to the next little activity, which we'll do as a whole group. Okay, does that sound all right to everybody? So I want you to think about the background, setting up the situation, seeing if they identify the knowledge gap, the purpose of the study, results, methods, and maybe their like larger implications. And I can post these things in the chat when you're in breakout rooms as well. Okay, I'm going to do that. Let's see how many people are. Okay. And we'll do this for like 5 minutes and then I'll bring you guys back and we can chat. All right. I think people are all coming back. So I'm gonna share my screen and we can all look at the paper together. All right. So let's first try to pull out the big problem. Does anybody have any ideas or anything you guys identified as the like general kind of topic?
I think that first sentence has two statements in it.
Yeah, exactly. It's right and straight to the point and saying we're going to be talking about plastics and we're also going to be talking about ocean acidification. Awesome. How about what did they do in this kind of experiment? I think it's the next couple of sentences, right? It's just talking about what they're using. Um, and then they move into the major discoveries that they had in their findings. And then let's see, kind of this whole chunk here is like their major results from their experiment. And then this last sentence is kind of the broader impacts and like the grander implications of this work. How do you guys feel about kind of did they establish a kind of knowledge gap, or do you think that um, that was kind of unclear? How do you feel about that?
I have a question. Just even on the first sentence, the problem statement, nothing is actually quantified there. Is that okay or not okay?
Yeah, so the first problem saying the like very first sentence,
Yeah.
yeah, that's okay in an abstract to be more general like that and saying that generally plastics are a problem in our oceans. That's we know this as a scientific community. And the ocean waters are becoming more acidified because of carbon dioxide. That's okay. But I do think that it is general and then moves right into what they did without kind of discussing, where this could be going. I think they identify this major general problem, um, but don't talk about the kind of knowledge gap they're going to be filling. So here, I would say that they did a good job of discussing like what they did and what they found. And then at the end, like connecting it back to the beginning. But I think that they're missing kind of that larger, like, what are they trying to answer with their study kind of thing. Does anybody else have any thoughts or opinions or questions about this one?
Sorry to ask again, another one. So is that like the intellectual merit kind of piece that's missing here?
Yeah, well, kind of. I think, yes, I think you're right. I think um, if you want to think about it in that kind of way, yeah. Showing like why it's novel, kind of. Yeah, for sure. That is one way that, funders definitely always ask you to be specific about making it known why it's novel and what you're doing. Why is it furthering the field, that kind of thing. Um, the last sentence kind of gets to that, but I would put that more even in the like broader implications of their work. Um, I mean, they even say like wider implications for ocean ecology, which maybe is not, you know, the best way of saying that, but yeah. Okay. So that's one example. I have a couple more that we can look at. Let me get back to stop sharing for a moment. Okay, so let me go back to my slides. Oops. Okay. So we definitely saw they gave results, methods, broader implications, but I do think they are kind of missing the purpose and the knowledge gap. And I think those are super important to think about with your own work. The other thing, how did you guys feel about the clarity of the writing? Was it easy to understand not being in that field, or do you feel like you got the gist of what they did and understood the main goals of the study?
I thought it was very specific to that topic. So there's a lot of words I didn't quite understand within the context, but it sounds like it's appropriate for the audience, though,
Sure.
intended
Yeah,
audience.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I agree. So I think that you, Frank, pointed out a very good thing to think about when you all are writing abstracts is your intended audience. That is a huge thing to think about. So if you're applying to like the URI grad conference, for example, this semester, that's going to have all departments, are going to be there. So the audience is going to be a lot more general than you're probably used to presenting to. So it's going to be quite the unique opportunity to make your work very accessible to a lot of people and trying to avoid those like jargony statements and kind of those, you know, convoluted statements that you might do in your own field and people in your own field might understand what you're saying. But that is a good point. That's one thing to definitely keep in mind. Okay. So the other thing I just wanted to bring up, so some of the dates and stuff of these upcoming conferences. So there's the International Graduate Student Showcase. That actual like presentation day is in April 30th. Those abstracts and proposals will be due March 24th. And for both the International Graduate Student Showcase and the Graduate Student Conference, the abstract length is pretty long. This is definitely longer than things I've seen in the past. So you have a lot of words to work with, which could be good, could be bad. It's up to you. But so you have plenty of words to describe your research, really identify this major field, what the problem is, what the knowledge gap is, and what you do to further the knowledge and fill that knowledge gap. My biggest thing with abstracts is really kind of identifying why your work matters and kind of what did you find. Those are the biggest things to keep in mind, I would say. We also have another workshop kind of in the same vein in this series, preparing conference posters. So keep an eye out for that. And then, as always, you can come to the Graduate Writing Center to work on these things. We love working with abstracts. We're pretty good at cutting things out that are not necessary, especially if we're not in your field. We can tell you too, like, this might not be great for a general audience, or this is great for a general audience. And I totally understand what you do, and it looks great. So you can sign up with appointments using this link, and I'm sure that you guys know how to access that. If you don't, feel free to email us and we can get you set up. We have tutors from all different disciplines, and we also have an English language learner specialist, Maureen. She's fantastic. So if that is something you're worried about, then she would definitely be a great option for you. Yeah, so does anybody have any more questions about general abstract writing? Or, if you want to look at something that you're working on, we can make an appointment in the future. Yeah, any of those things. And if not, thank you all for coming and tuning in. I will make sure to send the slides out to you all. They also have like links with where some of this information came from, so you can go to those things and learn more. There's also some links that have some examples for abstracts as well. But yeah, I'll send the link or I'll send the slides and the recording. But thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Yep.